Objection.
Mr. Speaker, at this time, it's my pleasure to yield such time as she may consume to the gentlelady from Virginia, the author of the bill, Mrs. Comstock.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today in support of my bill, H.R. 3249, the Project Safe Neighborhoods Grant Authorization Act. I'd like to thank Chairman Goodlatte and the entire Judiciary Committee for their efforts on this legislation and for working with me through the process to bring this to the floor. I wanted to set out some recent headlines from the in-depth reporting by the Washington Post on the rise of the MS-13 gang problem in the Washington metropolitan area. That includes Maryland, D.C., Virginia, and why this legislation is needed. MS-13 is taking over the school one teen warned before she was killed. She told the girl she'd see her in hell before stabbing her. Now she's guilty of an MS-13 murder. Quote, people here live in fear. MS-13 menaces a community just 7 miles from the White House. From the police, MS-13 members in Maryland stab man more than 100 times and decapitate him. And then my local paper, the Loudoun Times-Mirror, says MS-13 gang members convicted in a gruesome murder of a Leesburg teenager. In this particular case in Leesburg, Virginia, the teenage boy, Carlos Otero Enriquez, was stabbed over 50 times and his body was dumped in a quarry miles away in West Virginia. The acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia in the case, Tracy Doherty McCormick, had this to say after the murderers were convicted. The hallmark of MS-13 is extreme violence. This brutal kidnapping and murder is a tragic reminder of the impact MS-13 has on communities here in Northern Virginia. My hope is that our efforts to investigate and prosecute this case will send a clear message. Violence will be aggressively prosecuted. This and many of these other cases are why we need the Project Safe Neighborhoods Grant Authorization Act, which authorizes $50 million, but targets 30% for the Project Safe Neighborhoods, but targets 30% of it directly to already established regional gang task forces. As we know, MS-13 is a transnational gang which has been involved not only here in the Washington metropolitan region, but Los Angeles, in Long Island, in Houston, and other cities around the country. The Washington Post has highlighted how the 2014 border surge contributed to the MS-13 gang problem, writing, quote, the violent street gang is on the rise in the U.S., fueled in part by the surge in unaccompanied minors. The unaccompanied minors, who often fled their native country to get away from the gangs, arrive here only to find themselves targeted by those very same gang members they were fleeing. MS-13 preys upon these youngsters in their own community. And let me emphasize it, it is their own community that they are victimizing, who they may not have much of a family structure. And in effect, MS-13 tries to become their family or threaten them with death if they won't. Last summer, when I went on a ride-along with our Northern Virginia Regional Gang Task Force, I was able to see their good work right in front of us. There was a young man on the sidewalk in Sterling Boulevard in Sterling, Virginia, just not miles from. The gang task force noticed him and turned around and decided to stop them and see what he was up to. With years of experience, the officers knew the MS-13 indicators. The boy looked about 16 years old from what I could tell, but it turned out he was actually a 22-year-old gang member. He was covered in MS-13 gang tattoos when he lifted up his shirt when they asked him to do that. He showed with all of the particular signs of MS-13 from head all over his feet. It turns out he had been jailed in El Salvador for murder as a teenager when he was 16 and had been deported from the United States twice for engaging in violent crime. Now, it turns out that when they come to the border, right now we don't have the law to be able to stop them. Fortunately, this House did pass a law back in the fall on a bipartisan basis, it's over in the Senate now, to be able to stop these gang members from getting in the country in the first place and being able to deport them quicker. But in the meantime, we need to increase the work and the support for these regional gang task forces. We also saw the technology they use. They can use something along the lines of an iPad or an iPhone where they put this gang member's fingerprint on there, and immediately the records, the international records showing that he was a murderer, they had been in jail, came to light. But they need more of those resources. They only had 2 of those that they were able to use, and they said every one of their cars needs that kind of resource. That same night that we were on the ride-along, 3 other suspected MS-13 gang members were also picked up. And this isn't an aberration. At a town festival in Herndon, Virginia, in my district, the regional gang task force told us that they had identified an estimated 200 to 300 suspected gang members who were milling about while our children were popcorn, playing on, getting on the rides, and there, people coming together to have a hot dog or hamburger in a community festival. According to the regional gang task force, an MS-13 gang member put a hit out on his own brother because he refused to join the organization. Fortunately, because of the good intensive work of the Northern Virginia Gang Task Force, they spared this young man from being killed by his own brother. That is why we need to have these resources that we are voting on today. We need to help on a federal level. The community policing involved with the regional gang task forces includes officers who speak Spanish, understand the gang culture, and getting the kids out of this. They get involved in the education, getting into the schools, understanding where they are trying to target these young people, and they're familiar with their communities and have developed very good relationships with these communities. ICE officials complement these efforts by removing the dangerous gang members once identified and allowing the task force to work in our highest risk schools and communities to prevent gang violence. The Project Safe Neighborhoods Grant Authorization Act would direct this additional federal funding towards these gang task forces so that our gang task forces, which are comprised in my area of 13 local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, and can really make the best anti-gang efforts in this 3-pronged approach that they engage in: education, intervention and prevention, and enforcement. Mr. Speaker, I've seen firsthand the good work these gang task forces can do to remove these gang threats from our community. So I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak to this. And